This video was brought to you by CuriosityStream. The war in Ukraine hasn't gone well for Putin, either militarily or politically. On the battlefield, Russian forces have spent the last couple of months ceding territory to the Ukrainians, and Putin has already put the brakes on his partial mobilization after complaints from regional leaders that ethnic minorities were being disproportionately affected. Diplomatically, too, the invasion has made Russia a de facto pariah state in Europe and made neighboring post-Soviet states in Central Asia increasingly wary of what they see as Russian imperialism. However, one country that's really buddied up to Putin in the last couple of months has been the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran has sent countless drones and some medium-range missiles to Russia. And there's even been reports that Iran has been sending troops into Russia to help train Russia's fledgling army. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the blossoming relationship between Moscow and Tehran, what motivates it, and whether we can expect it to last. So, Russia and Iran have maintained pretty cordial relations since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, when Ayatollah Khomeini replaced the US-backed Reza Shah. And motivated by mutual antipathy towards America, the Soviets were actually the first country to recognize the Islamic Republic. However, there wasn't that much ideological overlap between the two sides. The Ayatollahs actually declared communism incompatible with Islam and executed Iranian communists as part of their purge in the 1980s. Nonetheless, though, their mutual dislike of the US was enough, and throughout the 90s, relations continued to improve between the two countries. Russia and Iran actually signed a whole load of arms deals, and in 1995, Russia's state-owned nuclear company agreed to build Iran's nuclear power plants, despite pressure from the West. However, relations did deteriorate under President Medvedev, who was generally more sympathetic towards America than Putin was. For instance, in 2010, Medvedev blocked the sale of an S-300 air defense system to Iran and voted in favor of new enhanced sanctions against the regime at the United Nations Security Council. That being said, though, relations did begin improving in 2014, after the West imposed new sanctions on Russia after the annexation of Crimea. Now, this change in relations was at least in part due to the fact that they were both sanctioned, which made them more economically reliant on one another. Which is one of the reasons why, in 2015, Iran made steps towards joining the Eurasian Economic Union, a multilateral free trade agreement led by Russia. And this new trend of friendship has continued as Western sanctions on both Iran and Russia have escalated over the last decade or so. And Western sanctions on Iran only escalated after Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, which Biden has so far failed to renegotiate. While Western sanctions on Russia have escalated after Russia's invasion in February, and have continued to escalate ever since. Anyway, you get the idea. While Russia and Iran aren't really natural allies, they've been pushed together by their mutual antipathy towards the West and by Western sanctions, which have made the two more economically reliant on one another. Now, because neither country needs oil imports, they've both got easily enough on their own. The main source of trade between the two countries at the moment is military hardware, and more specifically, drones. Over the last few months, Iran has sold thousands of Syed-136 drones to Russia, which have made a real difference on the battlefield. Now, the Russians, of course, deny this, in part because it's slightly embarrassing to admit that they don't have the domestic manufacturing capability to supply their army. But we're pretty much 100% sure that they've been buying drones from Iran, not least because Ayatollah Khomeini went on Twitter to brag about it. And a Russian Defense Ministry expert accidentally admitted it on live state TV. There have even been reports that Iranian advisors are on the ground in Crimea, teaching Russian troops how to use the drones more effectively. Anyway, these Sirehead drones are actually pretty similar to the Switchblade drones developed by the US for Ukraine. They're basically just drones with built-in warheads which fly straight at their target and detonate on impact. And it's worth noting that these are quite different drones from the ones popular with Ukrainian forces, such as the Turkish-made TB2 drone, which drops its munitions from a height and then flies away. In fact, the Iranian drone's unique style has led to them picking up a nickname: kamikaze or suicide drones. And while they might clearly be single-use, these kamikaze drones are effective for two reasons. Firstly, they're really cheap. Each Shahed drone is estimated to cost somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000. For context, one of those Turkish drones I talked about would cost about $5 million, while a US-made Reaper drone would set you back $32 million. Crucially, the Iranian drones are also significantly cheaper than Caliber cruise missiles, which used to be the Russians' preferred weapon of choice for striking Ukrainian positions. For context, each Caliber comes in at over $1 million, and there have been reports that Russia's stockpiles are already running low. The other reason that they're particularly effective, though, is that they can be sent in swarms. And if you're able to do this, if you have enough drones to send at the same time, you can overwhelm most air defense systems, which is what the Russians have been doing. Hence the Ukrainians' requests for new air defense systems from the West. Anyway, that's why the Russians like these drones so much. And that's not the end of their purchasing from Iran, because there have been reports that they're also looking at buying Iranian-made ballistic missiles, presumably because, as we said a moment ago, they're running low on their Caliber stockpiles. Crucially though, if the Iran-Russia arms trade continues to expand, Iran might use it to buy Russian-made jets to replace their aging air force, which has been hampered by decades of US sanctions. And having these jets could significantly improve Iran's military capabilities. It's not just military hardware they've been trading though. Iran and Russia are also jointly developing a new alternative to the SWIFT payment system. And Iran has also started importing significantly more Russian grain to make up for a drought-induced shortfall this year. So, you get the idea. While they're not natural allies, Iran and Russia have begun developing their own parallel economic system outside of the scope of Western sanctions, and this has only pushed them closer together. However, there are still some points of tension in the Russia-Iran relationship. For starters, they're both competing for Chinese oil exports, and thanks to domestic economic issues, China is importing less oil than usual. Secondly, there's also some tension over Israel, who have so far stayed resolutely neutral on Ukraine. If the Israelis decide that Russia is too close to Iran, they might start being more active in their support for Ukraine, perhaps even by supplying air defense systems. Thirdly, and finally, they've also had to put aside their disagreements in Syria. While both the Iranians and Russians have supported the Assad regime, Russia has always been wary of Iran's regional ambitions, and as such, have avoided supporting Iranian operations too enthusiastically for fear of upsetting Israel. Nonetheless, as things stand, their mutual antipathy towards the US and ambition for a parallel system free from Western sanctions outweighs any other considerations at the moment, which is why we should only expect Russia-Iran relations to improve going forward. And if that depresses you, then check this out. Last year, Team TLDR congregated for the first annual political pumpkin carving competition.
Each team member had 15 minutes to carve a random politician's face into a pumpkin before the others had to guess who they'd carved.
Everyone was furious at last year's result, so we brought the game back from the dead for round 2.
This time though, we headed to Rory's farm in Essex to up the game.
This time it was also a lot more serious and a lot more competitive.
Who did we carve?
Who won the contest?
Find out in TLDR's second annual political pumpkin carving contest, exclusively on Nebula.